Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Sitrep podcast channel, your forward operations base for all things military and historical wargaming. I am your host, Risky Jim, and today we are finally getting back to some modern era wargaming content. I know I've been hitting you guys with a whole lot of 80th anniversary World War II content lately, but what can I say? July and August 1943 was a very busy time in World War II. But today we're getting back to some post-war content with a game set in 1969 Vietnam. Specifically, we're looking at an NVA assault on the American firebase and Special Forces camp at Ben Het, using Mark Ritchie's tactical combat system in 15mm. Ben Het is definitely a very interesting battle and pretty unusual for the Vietnam War, primarily because of its location. It's very, very close to the borders of what was then South Vietnam, where they meet with the borders of Cambodia and Laos. This is in the central highlands region of South Vietnam, in the 2nd Corps Tactical Zone, where we had seen some ferocious fighting earlier in the war, notably at Ai Drang in November of 65, and later building up to a full-scale month-long battle at Dak To in November of 67. But this is 1969, after the Tet Offensive. LBJ is out, Nixon is in, along with his promises to get the Americans out of Vietnam, which would ironically lead to the expansion of the war in many ways. But leaving all that aside, Ben Het remains a hotspot nevertheless. This is because of its location. U.S. 4th Infantry Division has a battery of M107 175mm self-propelled howitzers here. These are very, very long-range guns, ideally suited for lobbing shells deep into Cambodia and Laos, where the Ho Chi Minh Trail was infiltrating out of these countries into South Vietnam. There was also the American Special Forces Able Team, A244, part of 5th Special Operations Group. They were at Ben Het to train a battalion of about 400 civilian irregular defense group militia. These Sidige soldiers are especially important at a place like Ben Het because they're friendly locals, or Montagnards, French, roughly speaking, for men of the mountain. They're not Americans, so they can infiltrate into places like Laos and Cambodia, even when officially American soldiers aren't permitted at this time. Their mission, of course, is to track all of these NVA infiltration channels back to their roots along the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos and Cambodia, and then call in all kinds of airstrikes and artillery missions, the object being, of course, to interdict the NVA infiltration into the Central Highlands. Needless to say, the NVA was getting tired of this shit, and by March of 1969 had organized an actual tank and mechanized infantry assault against Ben Het. As fate would have it, the Americans also had some tanks here, namely a platoon of Bravo Company 1st Battalion 69th Armored Regiment. This would make the Battle of Ben Het one of the only times in the Vietnam War where American and North Vietnamese armor actually engaged each other in a tank battle. I say tank battle because we're talking about PT-76s on the North Vietnamese side. Hardly worthy of the title, but the point still stands. Now, some of the Special Forces operators and the Montagnards had reported hearing heavy tracked vehicle traffic in the jungle. Intelligence kind of dismissed this, however, because, let's face it, the North Vietnamese aren't terribly famous for using massed armor attacks. They thought it was probably bulldozers improving the roads that made up the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They would be rudely corrected on the night of March 3rd and 4th, 1969, when armor of the 16th Company, 4th Battalion, 202nd NVA Armored Regiment mounted 10 PT-76s and a handful of BTR-50 APCs in a full-scale night armor assault against the firebase at Ben Het. That's right, this is a night battle, so we're going to have special rules for illumination rounds, burning vehicles, starlight scopes. Myself and Jennifer Perdue are playing the Americans and Montagnards. Meanwhile, Mark and John are playing the North Vietnamese Army. We've got enemy danger close in the wire. Let's stand to and see what happens. Alright, here is our table for today's game, 8 feet by 6 feet in 15mm. We are looking out of the south into the north. We're in the 2nd Corps Tactical Zone, about 10 kilometers west of Dak To, near the Laos and Cambodia borders. Here is the high ground that makes up the westernmost hill of the 3 hills that made up the Ben Het firebase. Speaking of firebase, here is the M107 175mm self-propelled howitzer. These were especially long-ranged artillery pieces that, again, were shelling interdiction points along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Some of this terrain is mine, some of it is Mark's, some of these vehicles are mine. I do apologize for my M48s here. These are in Marine Corps markings. These were actually Army M48s, again, 69th Armored Regiment. And again, we're looking here at the M107. That's going to be one of the key objectives in today's game. There's also an M42 Duster, which is supposed to be an anti-aircraft tank, but those twin 40mm autocannons are going to make a heck of a mess when it comes to tearing up either Viet Cong or NVA infantry coming towards us. Most of these infantry figures, in fact all of the infantry figures, are Marks, at least here on the Allied side. We have, again, a U.S. Special Forces team, as well as a lot of Montagnards. Now over here on the Vietnamese side, some of these guys are actually mine, but again, most of them are Marks. Some of these PT-76s are mine. Those are the ones that are the lighter shade of green there. The other ones are all Marks, along with that BTR-50 APC. So the wire cutters there, those are the guys that I provided for the table. But other than that, pretty much everything here is Marks. So there is a mix of Viet Cong and NVA. They are going to be trying to cut through that wire and getting some tanks or infantry onto that high ground and attack the American fire support base. Turn 1 has started and this game is now underway. Now again, this is a nighttime battle, so there's some pretty hefty penalties to shoot at anything that isn't illuminated. You see the little card there. I do have a couple of Special Forces snipers with early starlight scopes, but for everyone else, you see that yellow cotton that Mark is laying out? That is showing the radius of some pre-registered illumination rounds I had for my off-board mortars. Meanwhile, my one M48 tank has missed. However, my 106mm recoilless rifle, partly through the benefit of that +2 commander there, has scored a hit. It was a pretty long-range shot. It was 120 centimeters down the table. With that P-76, you see that it was just inside the illumination circle of one of my mortars. So boom, he's been hit, and once a PT-76 light tank takes an armor-piercing shot like that, it's pretty much over. That PT-76 is now burning, and that casts its own light. Notice all the new yellow cotton on the table. Meanwhile, I'm also keeping track of where I have laid all my hidden mines. I have 3 anti-personnel mines, I have 3 claymores, and I've got them set up mostly on my flanks in kind of a channelizing tactic. This allows me to focus most of my fire right down the center of the field. I've also got a bit of a spoiler position here. I was allowed to put up to 12 men on this forward high ground, so I used 12 of my Montagnards. Long story short, take your first shot. Yeah, these guys are kind of a sacrifice, but by denying that high ground, the NVA is going to need that high ground to shoot at my M107, which is the objective of the game. And sure enough, the enemy already has me under fire here. That RPG gunner just barely missed my Montagnards by only 1 on the dice, so at least for the moment, they're doing alright. That luck, however, doesn't last. Later on in the same fire phase, I do suffer 2 fatalities here among my Montagnards. It's those 2 guys on the 76 of felt. That felt, by the way, is a slit trench, gives him a +1 cover bonus, but didn't help him here. So the rifleman we remove with no problem. The light machine gunner, though, we keep his figure on the table with a KIA marker on him because the guy is gone, but the weapon itself is still operational. I have to get a guy to that weapon, pick it up, and put that support weapon back into operation. Meanwhile, Mark has a recoilless rifle of his own, 75mm, I believe of Chinese manufacture. You can see where my illumination rounds have sort of drifted off the target, but I was nevertheless able to drop a 60mm HE frag from one of my mortars and kill 2 of the crew. So the gun isn't knocked out yet, but I am working on it. Meanwhile, Mark is dropping some illumination rounds as well on my Montagnard spoiler position on that forward hill there. The yellow buttons are the actual impact points where the mortar shells landed, and then the illumination extends out from there a certain number of inches. So anything within that yellow puff there is going to be exempt from the normal penalty for night fire we see here. If you guys have seen the film Full Metal Jacket, you recognize the ad on my little building terrain there. Alright, on to my M48 tank, which still can't hit the broadside of a barn, apparently. He has a base chance of 7 at this range, +1 for his elevated ground, +1 for unbuttoned commander. No penalties for darkness, no penalties for moving, because he was shooting at a still target. So he winds up with a 9 on a D20, but he rolls a 13, so that's a miss again. My recoilless rifle, though, is still rocking it, though. That's definitely the MVP so far, probably because of that +2 commander. He's got all the same chances that I just went through with the tank, except he gets a +2 for his commander. So his net chance to hit on a D20 is actually an 11, and he winds up with a 6. So there's the 13 is the tank missing, and the 6 is the recoilless rifle hitting. You need low rolls in this game. Now we come to the penetration, which is kind of a joke. In this system, you take the firepower of the weapon, compare it versus the quality of the armor, and you wind up with, in this case, subtracting 15 off of my D20 result. So, long story short, take your second shot. That's the end of another PT-76. Meanwhile, through all this, Jennifer Perdue has been commanding the American right wing, and so far she's been doing really well, especially with that M42 Duster there. Those twin 40mm autocannon have really made a mess of the Viet Cong and the NVA wire cutters trying to get through our perimeter there. I tell her that it's kind of okay now. She can shift her fire against the tanks because those infantry are about to run into some claymores that they don't know about. My little spoiler position is finally starting to fade. They lasted longer than I thought they would. They've definitely done their job. Also, one of my anti-personnel mines is in their own slit trench. So even once Mark storms that position and takes that high ground, he's got one more unpleasant surprise waiting for him. However, he has managed to cut a few gaps in my wire you see there. I was able to finally shut down that 75mm recoilless rifle that was hiding back there in the swamp. Jennifer has knocked out another PT-76. These guys are about to cut another gap through my wire, but that's okay, because on the other side of that wire, Mr. Claymore is waiting to say hello.
Get ready for a surprise!
So we gotta be almost halfway through this game, and still that damn M48 can't hit a friggin' thing.
You are a worthless piece of shit, pal! Get out of my face!
But the MVP for this game is definitely this M40 106mm recoilless rifle, probably because of that +2 commander. In this system, a +2 is a pretty big bonus. As far as this M107 175mm self-propelled howitzer goes, he's just an objective. Notice he doesn't even have a crew. The entire table is miles within his minimum range. Here inside this bunker that I contributed to the table, we have a 50 caliber machine gun crew, +1 leader, and a radio who is trying to call in some of these reinforcements. So far, no luck. Even once we get reinforcements, we then have to roll to see exactly what we get. And some of the reinforcements are pretty crappy. Meanwhile, the enemy is getting reinforcements as we speak. An RPG gunner off the back of that BTR-50 APC there just launched an RPG rocket. It flew all the way up the table and it hit my recoilless rifle pit. His chance to shoot an RPG off the back of a moving vehicle and hit a target that far away that was partially concealed behind hull-down cover wound up being a 1. He rolled a 1 on a D20, then came his damage check, he rolled another 1. So with the combined odds being 1 out of 400, he not only knocks out my recoilless rifle, but even worse, he kills my +2 commander.
You gotta be shitting me, pal!
This was perhaps the disaster that finally prompted my tank gunner to put on his glasses, because he at last scores his very first hit of the game, and lands a hit on this BTR-50 that was carrying the RPG gunner. So yeah, 90mm high velocity round against that armor. Long story short, take your third shot. Pieces of him are going to be landing for the next 3 turns. Meanwhile, I've lost both of my law gunners here. This was just bad deployment on my part. They're way too far away to hit anybody with their laws. Meanwhile, the enemy can hit them at will. Yeah, this was just bad deployment on my part. Luckily, our radio man has finally made contact and we're getting some reinforcements. Then we got really lucky when it came time to determine exactly which unit was going to appear, and we got a second M48. Now this is actually going to be commanded by Captain John P. Stovall. He was the commander of this platoon of Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 69th Armored Regiment. Just in time too, because Mark's starting to drop some illumination rounds on our perimeter, and that can't be good. Meanwhile, Jennifer pretty much has the right wing locked down. In fact, Mark has pulled back some of his NVA infantry. I never even got a chance to detonate my claymores I have hidden on this part of the table. So now it's going to be time to redeploy that M42 closer to the center of the field. The last enemy reinforcements are now on the table. They've taken a hell of a lot of damage, but that's not slowing them down. One thing that's helping us is all these burning vehicles that casts a lot of light that allows us to put them under some pretty murderous long-range fire. Right as I say that, though, a PT-76 manages to land a hit on my M48 here, shoot over the berm of its hull-down shielding, hit the front of the turret, and somehow with a 76mm heat round, destroy the entire tank, killing the entire crew. But here comes Captain Stovall with another M48 right in the nick of time. Captain Stovall was actually really badly wounded in this battle historically. On our table, he might be the only one that survives the way things are going. All of my claymores and mines on this part of the table have now been detonated.
Get ready for a surprise!
You can see where they've clearly done a whole lot of damage. Nevertheless, the communists are now through the wire. So, hey, credit where credit's due. But even those that made it through the wire, as you can see, a lot of them are casualties with those little red tickets next to them. And on top of that, they're all still in our illuminated area, so fully exposed to all of our long-range fire, and as you can see, they still have a long way to go. Man, this PT-76 here, okay, first he gets hung up by the barbed wire. Then that happened to be just where I had hidden one of my anti-personnel mines.
Surprise!
Which blows off one of his tracks. Now doubly immobilized, I was able to hit him on the roof with my 4.2-inch chemical mortar. So, in all, yeah, just a really bad day. On the flip side, between burning tanks, burning gun pits where my 106mm recoilless rifle used to be, and Mark's illumination rounds, pretty much the entire American firebase is also eliminated, and we're starting to take more fire from the advancing communists. So Captain Stovall's tank is now in position finally after a couple turns of double movement. We also have that new Jeep with the 50 cal has arrived. They're both in hull down positions and will soon open fire on the advancing enemy. Meanwhile, we have also redeployed that Duster, that M42 anti-aircraft vehicle. Here was its former position. There was nothing wrong with its former position. Jennifer just kind of worked herself out of a job over here. Shot up all the enemy before they could get through the wire, and then those that were left fell back and tried to get through somewhere else. Spoiler alert, even if they had gotten through there were some claymores waiting for them.
Surprise! Surprise! Surprise!
Meanwhile, here is the Duster's card. You can see where it has a rate of fire of 8 with those twin automatic cannon. Those are 40mm. And what Jennifer targeted was that PT-76 that's kind of side on there in the center of your screen, scored a series of flank shots. A PT-76's armor is pretty terrible to begin with. On the flank, it's even worse. And 40mm isn't the biggest round, but when you're throwing out 8 rounds per fire phase, something's going to get through, and that's the end of another PT-76. Okay, I'm starting to feel a little bit better, despite our abnormally high casualty rate. I don't think the enemy's going to get a serious shot on our M107 there, which is the primary objective of the game. However, casualties are high, and the communists can win on casualties. Speaking of casualties, yeah, here comes some more fire from one of the last PT-76s. He's not going to try to score another, ridiculously lucky shot and knock out an M48. What they're shooting at instead is the M42 Duster. So the M42 Duster was hull down, so even once the enemy scored a hit on it, he then has to hit only the turret because the hull was considered hidden. So he has to roll over a 13 on a D20 to hit the turret. Once he did, though, that was the end of the Duster. Oh man, alright, so yeah, what's left here on the American firebase? We've lost one of our M48s, we've lost our Duster. The good news, though, is that the enemy is down to, I think, just one more tank, so I'm pretty sure that M107 is safe. Given that the entire American firebase is now considered illuminated, we just went ahead and removed all of that yellow cotton. It was the burning M42 Duster that sort of cinched it. Once that thing started burning, yeah, that whole hillside is lit up. But that's okay, Captain Stovall has scored a hit and killed the very last PT-76 light tank of the 202nd NVA Armored Regiment. So that's the end of the Armored Regiment, but not the end of the game, because that 76mm recoilless rifle there, Mark has gotten a new crew to it. He opened fire and he just scored a hit on the front of Captain Stovall's M48 there. So first Mark has to roll to hit, then he has to roll to make sure he shot over the berm. In other words, he has to hit the turret. And then he has to get through the armor, and he has made all those rolls. So he's gotten through the armor. We now have to see what happened. He has inflicted a KIA in that tank. We roll to see if it is actually Captain Stovall. Turns out it's not. So ironically, one of the historical casualties of this battle may be one of the few people on our table who isn't a casualty. And that's going to be the end of the game. Clearly, we won on the objective of the M107 self-propelled howitzer. The NVA never came close to that. However, the NVA can still win on casualties. We took a lot of losses here. We killed 26 NVA and 51 VC for a total of 77. Meanwhile, they killed 32 of us, but they get 2 points per casualty. So that's 64. On casualties, they actually came pretty damn close. Alright guys, there you have it. The Firebase and Special Forces camp at Ben Het has stood tall. Honestly, we got some pretty lucky rolls very early in the game. We got some great landings with our illumination rounds. We set just the right vehicles on fire, which provided more illumination across the NVA's axis of attack. And yeah, we pretty much shot them to pieces as they approached our perimeter. Now, they did get some very, very lucky rolls. As you saw, they took out my 106mm recoilless rifle pretty quickly. We did lose one of our M48s, which did not happen historically. I think one was badly damaged, and a couple of the crew wound up being KIA. But I actually lost an entire tank. Fortunately, I think it was that very same turn I got a second M48 on the table. Again, I got pretty lucky with the reinforcement rolls. It could have been a Jeep with another 106mm recoilless rifle, or just a Jeep with a 50 cal. But I got a second tank, again, that same turn that I lost the first one. Took a couple turns to get into position, but once he did, I was able to use that second tank, and Jennifer was able to use that M42 Duster, which unfortunately we also lost, to really shoot the NVA to bits as they, again, tried to approach our perimeter. Admittedly, I think this is kind of an uphill battle for the NVA. Okay, their PT-76s outnumbered me, I think 7-1 at one point, but still, you're talking about PT-76s against M48s. Who's walking away from that get-together? And then especially when I lost my M48, it seemed like the tide was turning. Right then, I got a lucky roll and got another M48. Honestly, if I was the NVA player, I would have been pretty frustrated by that point. But overall, it was a great scenario by Mark Ritchie, very well researched, great play from my teammates and my opponents, and overall, another great day at the South Florida Miniatures Gaming Club. So that's where we're going to leave it for now, folks. Thanks very much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Please remember to hit that notification bell. Also, please consider joining the Sitrep Podcast Discord. There is an auto-accept invitation link to our Discord in the description of this video. Join our community, see what everyone's up to, and best of all, show us what's happening on your hobby table. But for now, this is a Risky Jim with the Sitrep Podcast. We are rounds complete for another episode, and as always, Tango Mike for watching.